The promo images look good, but the question is, how does the figure hold up in person? Stay tuned to find out. Hello and welcome to another episode of Atomic Vinyl Reviews. The first review of 2018, in fact. Today, we will be taking a look at the Bandai and Tamashii Nations SH MonsterArts Godzilla 2017 figure. This Godzilla design comes from the 2017 digitally animated anime movie Godzilla Monster Planet, or Planet of the Monsters. This is a first part in a trilogy of films by Toho Animation in partnering with Polygon Pictures. The film was directed by Hiroyuki Seshita and Kobun Shizuno. It is the first full-length anime feature to star Godzilla, and you know what? It's about time. The main premise of the film is that it is set in a future where humanity have evacuated the planet, leaving it to the monsters only to come back to a world overgrown and ruled by them. To me, this sounds like a great premise, especially to explore in animation. Unfortunately, as of yet, the movie still hasn't received an international release, only being screened in Japan. It is confirmed that we will be getting an international release of the film on Netflix at some point this year. I still have my fingers crossed, though, that we will be getting screenings of it at least some cinemas, though this is in no way, shape, or form confirmed. Either way, I'll make sure I do a review of it when I do get a chance to see it, so stay tuned for that, guys. Personally, I'm not a big fan of the CG animation used to make this film, as I have a great passion for the hand-drawn animation used in more classic anime. However, I know it was more than likely done to keep the production costs down and make it faster for Toho to bring out all three of these films. And because the premise does look interesting, and it is Godzilla after all, I'm willing to try and look past that when viewing these movies. This particular incarnation of the King of the Monsters is quite unique, taking heavy inspiration from the American 2014 design, but with heavy alteration to the spine's, legs, face, and the overall texture of the creature, giving him skin reminiscent to a cross of a more classic Godzilla design, as well as deeply pronounced muscle fibers or densely packed vines. This, plus his dark green coloration and leaf-like spines, alludes to his new origin in the film, that of being descendant of plant life. This makes him more reminiscent of kaiju like Biollante, and his overall impression is very different from 2014, even if they share a very similar silhouette. The main difference is in the face, but I'll get to that when we go over the details and sculpt of the figure itself. Overall, even though I'm not a big fan of the 2014 design, and initially I was on the fence about this design, like I said in my Banpresto figure review, the design has grown on me, and I think it works in the medium and context of the story. It's quite a unique Godzilla for a unique movie. Now, back to the figure. Let's take a look at the packaging. He comes in a relatively big white box, nicely decorated with promo images on the front, or the back depending on how you see it, because on the side of the box that would typically be the back, based on the way you open the lid, we have a cool transparent window where we can peek through and take a look at the figure inside, just like the packaging of the Shin Godzilla MonsterArts that came just before it. Speaking of Shin Godzilla, I like how a lot of the Shin Godzilla figures had that very minimalist feel to it with the graphics. The only image we saw was the profile of Shin's head and simple text in flat red, black, and white colors. Just like all those figures, all the Monster Planet figures go with a very minimalist theme too, but with more of a futuristic sci-fi feel. This time going with more of a white, blue, green and black color scheme. Overall, the box is done very nicely. Do feel free to check out my unboxing video of this guy if you are interested in getting a sense of how he's packaged. As you may have heard, the figure does come with a special card. It's a simple paper card, just slightly larger than a postcard, nicely printed with an image of concept art of this Godzilla by Hiroyuki Seshita, one of the film's directors. And some text on the other side, nothing much, just the figure's name and the MonsterArts motto. Overall, it's fine for what it is, but I would have liked to have seen them do something more creative with this card, perhaps making a plastic one. I would have loved to have seen them do a holographic effect. I believe they're called lenticular images. You know, those ones you find on weird bookmarks or fridge magnets with the ridges that line the surface of the picture. And when you tilt it, it gives the illusion of depth, or makes the image move by a frame. I would have loved to see a Godzilla-themed one as an accessory, or, you know, in general, I think that would be something really cool to have as a poster. Anyway, the last point about the card. It only comes with the first production run of the figure, but for those of you who haven't ordered yours yet, don't worry. As of the recording of this video, all the ones in existence are part of the first run, and they will continue to be until we do get news of an official re-release. And finally, what you've all been waiting for, let's take a look at the figure himself. He stands approximately 18 centimeters or 7¼ inches tall, and roughly about 38 centimeters or 15 inches from head to tail, making him a very decent sized figure. Not quite as big as the recent Shin Godzilla or the large-scale Kyoku Godzilla 89, this guy is just slightly smaller than those, but is definitely the next largest figure in the line, as he's pretty tall and overall very bulky. But we will get into that more when we see the size comparison. Being an SH MonsterArts figure, he comes packed with the super articulation and outstanding sculpt we've come to expect, know and love with this line of figures. Honestly, I'm shocked it's taken me this long to getting round to reviewing a MonsterArts, them being the main line of figures I collect, and my all-round favorite. So looking at today's MonsterArts, I have to say, the sculpt on this guy is immaculate. From a number of sources, I've gathered that the group at Polygon Pictures that produced the animation of the Monster Planet movie closely oversaw the production of the figure. Unlike most MonsterArts figures, this one is not hand sculpted by Yuji Sakai, but rather the sculpt was directly based off the CG model used in the film, and he couldn't be more screen accurate. Taking a look at his head, you can see Godzilla, like the 2014 design, has small eyes and a rounded, yet slightly more elongated snout this time, and almost beak-like teeth. They are fused with the side of his mouth like a hard, bony beak, serrated at the edges to look like teeth, rather than having individual bone-colored teeth inside of his mouth. I've heard people compare this look to that of a snapping turtle, and it's rather appropriate. Looking at the sculpt here, you can see they captured the look perfectly. Everything from the fine detail of his snout, his creepy smile, his tongue, to his tiny eyes are captured nicely. He even has somewhat of a goatee-like beard thing going on under his chin and along his jawline. His mouth articulation is smooth but firm, like most of the figure, but I do wish his mouth could open a tad wider. Inside, we see his tongue painted a dirty tan color. It is non-articulated, unlike a number of MonsterArts figures, which just shows you the range of articulation we've come to expect with this line. Speaking of articulation, his head and neck are very well articulated, with a great range of movement, especially when looking down, with extra sculpted details hidden beneath the articulation points to complete the sculpt when posing him. But I'm sure we all know this is standard practice with MonsterArts figures. Unfortunately, if we do pose the head to the side like this, we do get these gaps, as well as a number of others occurring in key areas throughout the figure. These have been one of the main targets of people's complaints about this figure, though I do agree that some areas of articulation are somewhat restricted and prone to gapping. Overall, I feel most of these complaints have been too harsh on the figure. What I think SH MonsterArts does is they give you as wide a range of articulation as they can, whilst doing everything they can to keep the sculpt from looking broken up. And for some joints though, there is the option of pushing the articulation further at the expense of the sculpt, like with this neck joint. This goes for all SHMA figures. You can make them have as many or as few gaps as you like, depending on how you pose them. And a lot of the time, watching reviews, I get the feeling a lot of people out there just need to spend more time learning how to properly articulate these figures. For example, getting the most out of the barbell style joints in the hips to cover up those gaps. That said, I know that some articulation on these figures is engineered better than that of others, and while overall these don't detract from the figure for me at all, I will point out 3 main points on the figure that could bother some people. First is this limited waist joint that does tend to show a gap on his chest when messed with. It's there, but personally I don't mind it. I rarely articulate my Godzillas at that point anyway, and it is a case of it's up to you how much or how little of the gap you make. The second is these free-floating shoulder pads at the base of the arms. Some collectors have had issues of them twisting behind the arms while articulating in that area, which my figure's left arm was like that when I got him out of the box, but since then I haven't had any issues with it at all, and if so, it's an easy fix, no biggie. The last one, and I don't know if anyone's brought this up yet, but it's the one issue of the articulation slash sculpt that I would really like to see improved, because unlike the other two, it breaks up the sculpt while it's in a neutral pose. It is with the new way they cut the sculpt to fit the articulation for the tail. While I do really like it, and it works pretty well, when Godzilla is in a normal standing pose, there are big gaps along the underside at the base of his tail, with blades of sculpt protruding out like big scales or spikes. I know they made these like this to allow for posing his tail downward, and I'm not sure if there really is a better way of doing it, but I would have had these blades angled inward closer to his tail to help smooth out the sculpt, as for the most part you're going to have him in a fairly neutral standing pose anyway. Like I said, these are just very minor nitpicks that honestly don't bother me or bring this figure down, as aside from that, the articulation on this guy is excellent. He has a very wide range of movement where you need it. The joints move smoothly but are firm and hold their pose. I've had no joints fall off, which is very rare with one of these figures. I feel that they're really improving with each new figure they put out. Sorry for going into that tangent about the articulation after I'd only just started talking about the sculpt, but we've gotten that out of the way at least. Anyway, moving down from the head, we see the same great detailing throughout the body. I especially love the texturing across his arms and chest. The sculpt is sharp and clearly defined throughout. The texture is really pleasant to look at and hold in person. There's not much more I can say. The sculpt couldn't be better. This design has a very rounded yet muscular build, and some interesting stylistic choices done with the detailing and proportions. He has fairly lean, more humanoid legs, supporting a rounded body with a small, more elongated head. You know what? I actually really like the build of this design. I know a lot of people have had an issue with these characteristics, but I think it helps him feel massive and unique, like I said. Since this one and the 2014 Godzilla are going for a more generic design, for lack of a better word, with a more dinosaur-like reptilian face, I think adding the bulk and the strange proportions really helps give him character and stand out amongst other dinosaur-like monsters. Let's take a look at the legs on this guy. Like I said, they're far more humanoid than most Godzillas and have a curious design. In particular, his feet are very strange and at first feel very out of place. They remind me a lot of certain incarnations of Xenomorph's feet from some of the later Alien films. It's strange though, over time I've actually started to like this design, of all reasons because it looks so strange and out of place. On this figure, they're cast and detailed really well. I love the arrangement of the claws and how intricate the details are even on the underside of his feet. On one though, the surface is smoothed out for the copyright information. This time round, the segmentation of Godzilla's tail changed from straight bands to what looks like angled interwoven bands of muscle. It's sculpted very well with the same beautifully textured detailing running down the tail till we reach the pointed tip, which appears smooth, reminiscent of a bone-like spike capping off his tail. Like I said, the segmentation on his tail is split up really well, hiding the articulation cleanly, besides the first couple of joints on the underside at the base of his tail. And there's a great range of movement with his tail from side to side, but not as much up or down. In general, it's pretty lucky for these figures that Godzilla designs tend to have segmented tails, making hiding the articulation far easier than for other creatures. Looking at one of my favorite parts of this figure, these spines, they are beautifully recreated here and are very accurate to what we see in the trailers and promos from this film. This time round, rather than going for 2014's simpler, rough triangular spines, they went for a more traditional jagged design with clear inspiration from leaves, making them smooth with a raised center to each, making it resemble the veins that run through most leaves. Since we're on the topic of the spines, let's get into the paint. One of my favorite things about this figure is the use of contrast between the matte paint job across most of the body and the use of gloss over the spines. This combined with the jagged yet smooth sculpt really reminds me of that glossy texture of sharply cut stones, such as flint or obsidian arrowheads. Furthermore, each spine is a nice dark green, tipped off around the edges with a carefully airbrushed light green, which really makes them stand out. On a side note, the spines are cast in a slightly more pliable plastic than some recent figures, like that of GMK or 54 MonsterArts, so they're less prone to breakage, though obviously still be very gentle with them. They're more like the Millennium Godzillas in feel. Speaking of the Millennium Godzilla, the overall coloration of this guy is a very similar matte dark green-gray color to the first release of that figure, with subtle highlights over most of his body, and if you look really closely, you can even make out some subtle green specks over that too. He has that beige tan colored tongue and tiny black glossy eyes. I know in the film and other figures he has blue eyes, but it looks pretty good here, and at this scale it's really not an issue. Another major complaint from people is that the paint job is dull and lacking. While there are touches that I would have liked to have seen improved, like either some darker or brighter highlights on the nails of the figure, or even just some gloss there to make it stand out. Overall, I'm really happy with the paint job on this figure. In person, it's nowhere near as bland as some reviews would have you believe, especially in the right light. The spines are beautiful and the glossy contrast is very eye-catching. Furthermore, based on what we've seen, this coloration appears very accurate to the source material, this being a very monochromatic Godzilla design, so you can't really fault the figure there. With that out of the way, let's get to the size comparison. Welcome back. As you can see, he's a really nicely sized MonsterArts figure. He scales nicely with other figures, though obviously not to actual scale though. From what we know, he's gonna be either 50 or 300 meters tall in the film. We can only really speculate as to why though. I have a few theories myself, but we won't know till we get the international release. Please, no spoilers in the comments though, if you do know what's up with that. In conclusion, I highly recommend this figure. If you are a fan of this design, or MonsterArts figures in general, you will not be disappointed. The sculpt is spot on, and minus some very minor nitpicks, the paint and articulation are excellent. To tell you the truth, objectively, I should give this figure the Jet Jaguar seal of approval. For you guys who don't know, on my channel, that is the title or award I give a figure of outstanding quality. A 10 out of 10, basically. For the sculpt alone, this figure has earned it. The problem is, if I was to give this figure that award, almost by default, I'd have to give practically every MonsterArts the same award, because they consistently deliver some pretty outstanding stuff. For the most part. But I want to save that title for very select figures that I really love. That might change in the future for this figure though, after I've seen the actual film though. But for now, this figure gets a very high honorable mention. And that's the review. In the comments below, let me know your thoughts on the figure or the new design in general. Or what upcoming figures are you really excited about picking up? For me, it's the upcoming MonsterArts Mechagodzilla 74 and the 2002 Godzilla they're releasing. The 74 is by far my favorite version of Mechagodzilla, and the sculpt on the 2002 Godzilla looks gorgeous. Thanks for tuning in again. I hope you enjoyed the review. Stay tuned though, I have a Gamma-related unboxing coming up later in the week, and then after that we'll take a look at a video covering all the Bandai 2017 Monster Planet figures, and much, much, much more. Check out the links in the description below, like, subscribe if you haven't already, and all that jazz, and as always, may all your vinyl be irradiated vinyl. Over and out.